morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Obviously, another busy day ahead. Before we jump into it, I wanted to let everybody know about some awards we picked up last night. We picked up a handful of awards that highlights the really rich and diverse programming we have across all CNN. Last night at the Creative Arts Emmys, Apollo 11 won 3 Emmys for picture editing, and sound mixing. That is a record number of Emmys that any CNN film has ever received. So congratulations to Amy Entelis, Courtney Sexton, and everyone involved in that terrific film. In addition, our coverage of Hurricane Dorian picked up a Deadline Club Award last night for National TV Spot News reporting. That coverage ran on the lead with Jake Tapper and featured incredible on-the-ground reporting from Patrick Hoffman, Paula Newton, and their respective teams. And through Hurricane Dorian, I know that everyone out there put themselves at great personal risk, and it is truly special to see that honored. So congratulations to everyone on these honors. We're going to be back covering yet another hurricane in the next 48 hours, so that'll be part of what we talked about. We're going to begin, as always, with Matthew and our COVID coverage.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So with so much coming into focus on the administration versus science, here's what is clear from the science almost 6 months in. However much we track the numbers up and down week to week, the overall spread has not slowed down in any significant life-changing way. The science does know here. We are at almost 6.6 million U.S. cases and almost 195,000 deaths. So we are still in a period of recent decline. Cases and death averages still down double digits in the last 2 weeks. But if you zoom out on the timeline, this number is still bigger than March or April or May or most of June. We are still above the peak that originally locked all of us down in the spring, and the fall and flu season have not even kicked in yet. This will be a key week now to watch, a key window for the numbers, a week after Labor Day, past the weekend backlogs. And then vaccines, the other big part of this story. There are now growing concerns in the U.S. on the AstraZeneca trial and the safety stop. Our partner, Kaiser Health News, reporting that the highest levels of the NIH are very concerned about that suspected side effect, about what actually happened to the patient with a spinal cord condition. An NIH official saying that AstraZeneca needs to be more forthcoming about this. And of course, it has resumed trials in the UK. The other big sort of vaccine cautions about timeline. The world's largest vaccine manufacturer warning that the 2-dose regimen could mean 4 to 5 years until everyone gets vaccinated, and former FDA chiefs saying an emergency authorization will likely be targeted, not a broad access for everyone. And of course, the administration versus science. In the wake of hearing, quote, nothing more could have been done more, packed gatherings, the president distant, but his audience shoulder to shoulder, the outlandish Michael Caputo claims, Schaffner telling Eboff he has learned the professional CDC staff has been in, quote, trench warfare with Washington. Looking at the key numbers, the key regions on our famous CNN map, more than 40 states are down or steady week over week. The sharpest increases we're watching, Nebraska, Wyoming, and Wisconsin, while some hard-hit states, California, Florida, and Texas are all mostly down. We've got Rosa Flores in Miami. South Carolina's lieutenant governor and 2 staff test positive, mild symptoms. We've got Nick Valencia in Atlanta on general regional news lines, and Pennsylvania's governor plans to appeal a federal judge's ruling banning certain large gatherings as unconstitutional. On the school front, there is growing tension in the nation's largest school district. It's less than a week before some return to classrooms. As we learn from the American Academy of Pediatrics, that 550,000 U.S. children have had coronavirus. In New York City, 55 staff test positive as part of that massive testing screening. The city standing up a COVID situation room, adding 2,000 educators. The union president saying that New York City is not ready for Monday's in-person return. 2,000 more is not enough. and that test results are still taking 2 to 3 days, too long for all this to work. This on the college side, as more campuses switch back to remote, like University of Wisconsin-La Crosse in northern Illinois, in all over 45,000 cases on campuses, and Biana's on the education front today. From health, we've now got a fresh, closer look at just how long and complicated a vaccine rollout could be. So just published from Maggie Fox and Health, there's just more to it than you think with the vaccine rollout. Even in the best circumstances, it could take most of the summer to get most people shot. There is no current mass public vaccination campaign in place for this. It normally takes a year to get the flu vaccine out. There's the 2-dose situation. Plus, it's an experimental vaccine. You need time to track people, see if there are adverse reactions. There is no plan, no infrastructure in place for any of this yet. Just a couple of other health notes. The Gates Foundation reporting that 25 years of progress on global health goals have basically been stopped down in 25 weeks. And we will watch for a noon Harvard Forum on vaccine efforts and a briefing with the Infectious Diseases Society and former CDC Director Frieden on global vaccine research and what more precautions could be taken now. And we've got Sanjay and Elizabeth available. We've got the wrap pieces on coronavirus. Nick Watt does 468. Erica Hill today, 579. And I'll pause there.
Thank you, Matthew. International COVID.
All the good storylines, Jeff, today from International. Israel breaks its daily infection rate, recording almost 5,000 new cases just before the country goes back into a 3-week general lockdown that will see schools and restaurants close across the country. With the record number of severe cases also spiking, the Deputy Health Minister today issued a pretty dire warning saying the nation could see deaths like there were in New York and Italy. The record comes as, Prime Minister Netanyahu arrives in D.C. for the signing ceremony with the normalization agreements with the UAE and Bahrain, which I know we'll get to in politics, but this is really where politics and pandemic collide for him. Clearly masks won't be required for the hundreds at that ceremony, but he is under intense pressure at home in Israel for the way he's handled the whole COVID crisis. So, in Israel, when mask wearing is mandatory everywhere, it's going to be really interesting to see, does he wear a mask? How does he deal with that ceremony? What kind of message is he going to send back to the people of Israel while he goes through that sort of diplomatic ceremony here in D.C.? So Oren Lieberman is covering all aspects of that. In Hong Kong, some good news today. Reported no locally transmitted cases for the first time in 2 months. Restrictions in that territory will start easing on Friday with bars, clubs, theme parks reopening. Restaurant in-service dining is going to be extended to midnight. Gatherings of no more than 4 people still remains in place, and mask wearing is still mandatory. However, Hong Kong has just finished this 2-week mass testing that saw almost 1.8 million people tested. They found only 38 new cases. The testing itself cost about $68 million. It really is sort of a case study in, that rigorous enforcement of restrictions, the consistent, pushing in, easing off, pushing in, easing off, plus mass testing. And, is that a sort of a symbol of how other areas can treat the virus? It seems to have success. On the flip side, in the UK, the Home Secretary today saying that the country's testing shortage is unacceptable. So people are having to wait weeks for a test or travel hundreds of miles around the country to find a place to get a test. The Health Secretary himself says there have been what he calls operational challenges in meeting the sharp rise in demand for tests as cases in the UK surge again. So we're really going to have sort of Will Ripley on the Hong Kong side of things, Scott McLean on the UK side of things, looking at how different countries seem to be having different levels of success with their operational testing. In France, Melissa Bell gets access to a hospital in Bordeaux to see how doctors and staff are coping with a second surge in that country. Bordeaux and Marseille, two of France's biggest cities, have announced much tighter restrictions on public gatherings to try and stem the recent sort of surge. Groups of no more than 10 people are now allowed to meet in Bordeaux, even outdoors. And this comes as Macron is really resisting the urge to sort of go into any lockdown of any shape or form. Melissa is filing whips for the UK shows on France and Europe in general. and she'll be putting together a broad piece for tomorrow. Some interesting lines came out of the German health ministry today. As Matthew was saying, just in terms of where we are in vaccine developments, one minister said she's not expecting there to be a vaccine for broad public use before the middle of next year, despite all the optimism coming from various pharmaceutical companies. The health minister added then for any vaccine to actually take hold and make a difference, 55 to 65% of citizens would have to be vaccinated. It's interesting that that figure seems to be similar to what the South Koreans are saying. So is that really the baseline, what you need for maximum testing to be effective? And then the government's also there plowing $445 million into a German company to support their development of a vaccine. Fred is filing a writ for noon on that investment from the German government. In India, the health ministry has announced that 155 health workers, including 64 doctors, have died contracting the virus since March. 29 members of parliament have also come down with the virus before that reopens on Monday. And India is expected to hit 5 million cases tomorrow. And they added another 83,000 today. Vedika Sood has been covering that for us overnight and can be available as requested through the morning. And then lastly on COVID, a global Pew survey has found that the image of the US around the world has plummeted in the wake of its virus response, with respondents in many of the traditional allied nations critical of President Trump's handling of the crisis and viewing him as less trustworthy than other world leaders, including Putin and Xi Jinping. The major survey across 13 countries found favorability towards the US at the lowest it's been in 2 decades. The survey's embargoed till 10 a.m. and Issa Suarez will be coming up for us on that at that point. That's it on COVID.
Thank you very much, Mike. I do think that as we hit the noon ceremony at the White House, the focus on Netanyahu and why he's even here, given what's going on in Israel, and how he participates in that ceremony with or without a mask, and how the audience is part of it, and how that will all resonate back in Israel as well, I think is a really important story today. Business.
Jeff, good morning. U.S. stock futures ticking up over 200 points right now prior to the release of some industrial production data that may provide some insight into the economic recovery. But this morning, it's all about the winners and losers of this pandemic economy and retail. Amazon saying it's hiring 100,000 new staff at minimum wages because of the surge in online shopping amid the pandemic. FedEx also saying it's adding 70,000 workers to meet the holiday season demand, but not such a rosy picture in entertainment. Tenet was supposed to be the movie that brought people back to the theaters, but not in this case. The film only making $30 million over the first 2 weeks with 2 anemic weekend totals. Experts say that this is going to be a harbinger of what is to come this fall. Frank Pallotta is tracking that for us this morning. And, of course, lastly, in a trending sign of the time, the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade will go on, but will now be a television-only special presentation, a major shift in its 94-year history. Christy Romans, Allison Cossack, up and available on those threads. And that is where we begin on COVID.
Thank you very much. Washington COVID.
Okay, so as the U.S. approaches 200,000 deaths, both the president and his son-in-law this morning claiming Trump were rounding the corner. Jared, this has been a success story. And this, as we have seen, both Nevada, Sunday, Las Vegas, this Latino event last night, and as you mentioned, as we go forward to today, just watching how all these people gather at the White House, clearly defying what science is saying. There is also more on Woodward. The book itself actually publishes today. He will obviously be on AC tonight. And this new sound where, again, he talks about how deadly COVID is as far back as February. This is all expected to be front and center in the ABC town hall that he'll do later tonight in Philadelphia. Acosta confirmed the details that we talked about yesterday of this Michael Caputo Facebook post claiming that there's a CDC resistance unit, and as Matthew said, that the administration is at war with the CDC. There's also other Trump versus science stuff this morning, this Trump pushing to be able to have indoor rallies, even though the science clearly says that is not okay, and these increasing concerns about the vaccine and the White House talking points on the vaccine and whether or not people will be able to believe that. Just quickly on voting, Pam Brown is going to file today a piece on how lawyers from both sides are gearing up for this post-election showdown. She has new details around that. And this is all necessary and will be part of a bigger picture about how the new hanging chad of this election will be signatures and what those signatures look like. And I think that's it for Washington COVID.
Okay, thank you. So again, reiterating the event at the White House today, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the international on the merits of the peace deal. But I do think that we need to make sure that we've captured the whole Caputo story. I mean, he's pushing this bizarre conspiracy, warns of armed revolt. We can't separate him from Trump, meaning he's a Trump appointee, and so we need to make that clear. But also, Michael Caputo, as we know, has been at the center of many different controversies in the Trump time, including the Mueller investigation and the Senate Intel investigation, and he has appeared at many different strange times. And I think telling the fuller Caputo story is something that we should be doing. Let me open it up for thoughts on COVID.
Hey there, I just want to let everyone know about a great op-ed from one of our new voting analysts, Rick Sildes, where he basically makes the case that if you're healthy enough to go grocery shopping, you should consider voting in person as a way to help alleviate the pressure at the polls. I just think it's really interesting and a little different than some of the things we've been hearing, and worth a read and a discussion for people.
And he'd be a good guest to come on and discuss that.
Hey, we've done this before, but I think it's also worth pointing out as Virginia said, the White House line about vaccines, and the president was on Fox again this morning talking about, any week now we have a vaccine. I think we should keep doing this, and we've done it before. We should keep underlining this framing of Trump as the flim-flam man. It's he's constantly promising this crap that doesn't materialize, but it, keeps people buoyant, and especially his base buoyant. But I think we should keep making that framing as he keeps doing it.
Other thoughts? Okay, let's make sure we're digging into the fuller Caputo story, please. Matthew, the rest of domestic.
Okay, Hurricane Sally. We are in for a very long day, night, overnight, morning on the Gulf Coast. Sally slowed to a crawl. That means huge rainfall totals and storm surge. The weather team says the way to think of this is not exactly when there's a landfall, but how long it spends making landfall. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dave for the forecast.
Yeah, good morning. We are watching the storm, which is now clearly visible on radar. It's just about 60 miles offshore, and we're really starting to see the impacts moving along the coast now, where the heavy rain is picking up and the winds are picking up. The storm is forecast slowed to a crawl overnight. It is now moving at only 2 miles per hour. That's slower than a walking pace, and that is going to be what is responsible for producing up to 30 inches of rain in parts of Mississippi, Alabama, into the Florida Panhandle. Those will be the areas that are hardest hit, kind of sparing New Orleans at least the worst of it. This is going to go on for a long time. It's going to last well into Wednesday with the hurricane force winds, a lot of storm surge, a lot of power outages. It is a Category 1 storm. That is probably the only good news that we have seen overnight, with this not expected to be a borderline Cat 2 or Cat 3, but it is still going to have a lot of impact. Beginning later on tonight, we'll see the landfall probably late tonight into around daybreak tomorrow. It looks like it's going to be somewhere along the Alabama-Mississippi border, and those areas will continue to get pounded throughout the day tomorrow. Once inland, the storm will weaken, but flooding is expected well inland into the southeast, into Georgia, into the Carolinas, where up to 10 inches of rain is forecast.
And just in the broader context, so many systems is active in the Atlantic right now, so early that we are about to assign the last letter in the alphabet after Vicky. Ed Lavendera is in Gulfport, Gary Tuckman in Biloxi, and Polo Sandoval will be in Mobile, and the full Weather Center team in place for this. To the wildfires, 3 dozen dead, almost 2 dozen missing in these unprecedented fires, as, of course, the president shrugs off the science right there on the ground in California. About 100 wildfires burning in the West. The Oregonian newspaper reports state police there have opened the first ever mobile morgue to deal with this. California has seen over 4,000 buildings destroyed, and Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco have some of the worst air quality in the world right now. We have, of course, thoroughly covered Trump and Newsom and the denial of science, and Newsom pointing out that, yes, there have been years of poor forest management, but that a giant percentage of that forest land is federal. The weather looks to improve a little bit on a few fronts. In Oregon in particular, we shall see. And as we reported yesterday, the smoke from the wildfires out west seen as far away as Canada and upstate New York. We've got Dan Simon live from the Berry Creek fire in Central California, Stephanie Elam and Chiang-La in Southern California, in Monrovia near the Bobcat fire, and Martin Savage in Oregon. Breaking news this morning in the Breonna Taylor case. We've learned the city of Louisville is about to announce a huge settlement with her family. The attorney for the family telling CNN that the settlement involves both money and a list of police reform moves. Another source telling us that this is a multi-million-dollar settlement. We expect an announcement from the city and family attorneys in the next few hours. This is separate and apart, but unrelated, of course, to the other big news we're waiting for, the decision on whether a grand jury will indict the officers involved in her fatal shooting. We think that is soon, but there is no official timing on that. Alex Field handling this for TV right now. We've got Mark Morales digging on the ground in Louisville as well. We're, of course, keeping tabs on the deputies ambushed, learning much more about them, about how they helped each other in the moments after that terrible attack. They are in critical but stable condition. Both are relative rookies. One's a 31-year-old mother, the other a 24-year-old man, both shot 4 or 5 times. But even with that, we see from the surveillance video the female officer helping apply a tourniquet to her partner. The LA mayor says that saved his life, and the sheriff says by some miracle, no vital organs were hit for either of them. And then just as an aside, the sheriff of LA County on the radio challenging LeBron James to match the reward money to make a statement in light of the NBA's activism. No response yet from LeBron James. This whole thing happening in the backdrop of these major tensions over shootings at the hands of LA deputies, but this time it's deputies who are the target. We've got Josh Campbell and Sarah Seidner on this story, and Ryan Young stays on the bizarre story of the South Dakota Attorney General involved in a fatal car accident, having first reported he hit a deer. It later turned out to be a pedestrian who died. He insists that he did not drink at the event he was coming from. Nothing to indicate what he had hit, he said. That's it.
Okay. I do think that we should be putting the LA County Sheriff Villanueva on the air for a number of reasons. I do think that packaging the video and the photos of the 31-year-old mother of 6 cop saving the life of her partner, I think is just an amazing story. And rarely do you ever get video like that and photos like that. And I would put that together and tell the story. It's amazing. I do think that the South Dakota Attorney General story says he hit a deer and turned out to be a person is a really good story and should be done as a piece, not just a voiceover. And I do think that given what's going on in California and given what's going on with the hurricane and all this talk of climate change, there's a bigger step back piece to be done about how climate change has now been thrust into the presidential campaign in a much bigger way. And perhaps David Challinger can address that in politics, but I think we should be, doing a step back and looking how, both candidates have been forced to talk about climate change and what their, plans are. Before we move to international, let me open it up because there's a lot of domestic stories there. Any thoughts on any of those domestic stories or anything else?
Hey, it's Seidner just chiming in on the deputies, and I completely agree with you that the female deputy, they've only been on the force for a short amount of time, and what she did was incredible. I do want to mention that if we get Villanueva, there is a lot of tension in Compton in particular for a couple of reasons, and one is because of this situation where there are officers, someone who came out and said that there is a gang within the LASD called the Executioners who are doing all manner of things in the community. And we've been hearing that from community members, that there is an extreme distrust, dislike of the LASD. And the LASD has also had a long history in Los Angeles where their sheriff was indicted, 6 of their deputies indicted for obstruction of justice in some things that happened inside of the jail. So there's just a long distrust there, and I think that should be addressed, although that should have no bearing. No one should ever go and shoot 2 deputies who had nothing to do with anything, who were new to force. But I do think there are some serious tensions there, never mind the shooting in the back of a man a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, and this is Susie. We do have Villanueva tonight for Aaron, so we will get into all of that with him.
Okay, so that's great. Thank you, Susie. And just make sure you touch base with Sarah and the team in LA so that we're fully briefed on all of those aspects of it. But I really want to encourage, so thank you for those notes, Sarah. Very helpful. I also really want to encourage the first part of what Sarah said, which is I really think it's an extraordinary tale of this rookie cop saving the other cop, and those few moments, and we rarely get video and photos like that, and I think we should tell that story. Thank you, Sarah. Other thoughts? International.
So key focus through the rest of the morning, the White House ceremony, diplomatic coup, unnecessary sideshow, meaningless spectacle. We're going to look at all the angles from all sides. Oren has a good piece in the system looking at the long history of normalization efforts between Israel and Arab states, and beg into that. Carter in the late 70s through the Oslo Accord and on to Obama. A look at how many presidents have tried and failed to find a breakthrough for the Middle East conflict. So that's a really nice sort of step back piece, a bit of context. Oren's up live around that, or without that, from Jerusalem. We also have correspondents looking at how this is playing across the region. Becky Anderson in the United Arab Emirates. She interviews their foreign minister later this morning. Sam Kiley is also available to play into analysis from Abu Dhabi. And John Defterios has been looking at the economic and business implications of the deals across the morning. Outside of that, the other sort of main sort of news stories we're looking at, the Russian opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, has posted a picture from his hospital bed in his first direct message since he was poisoned. He says he's now breathing on his own without medical support, and he also plans to return to Russia as soon as he's recovered. Fred Pleitgen is on that from Berlin, and we also have our Russian speakers on the ground chasing family and hopefully, fingers crossed, Navalny at some point. And then very lastly, just a couple of good pieces from China for us to mark. China has agreed to a EU request for independent observers to be granted access to Xinjiang province in the north. That's the focal point of all the Uyghur repression, and where more than 2 million Muslim minorities are reported to be imprisoned in these so-called re-education centers. This comes as the Trump administration has imposed a trade ban on 6 Chinese companies from the region. We've been covering that throughout the morning with Stephen Jiang. And then lastly, Ivan Watson, he's got a really nice piece on how pro-democracy protesters are fleeing Hong Kong by sea in a very dangerous effort to reach the self-ruled island of Taiwan. So last month, 12 Hong Kong activists were picked up by Chinese Coast Guard while making this kind of what would have been a 450-mile trip over to Taiwan, and they're now detained on the mainland in China. So Ivan takes a look at, how people are using that sea passage to now try and flee Hong Kong. And that's where we'll leave it.
Thank you, Mike. I just would say that, specifically for the noon show where the signing ceremony is, and perhaps for Sit Room, which I know has Kushner, look, they deserve credit for these deals, and we should not gloss over that, and we should not dismiss it by any stretch. This is better than not having those deals. Now the question is, what did they promise in exchange for the deals? Where does that leave the U.S.? And then the bigger question is Saudi Arabia going to come in and do the same? Because that obviously would be a huge, huge move. So I think there's a lot of questions around this, and they deserve credit. Business.
Hi there. So we're continuing to track developments with TikTok. The Trump administration yesterday providing some details on what a TikTok ban would look like. Kushner on CNBC this morning saying that the president made a decision on the Oracle TikTok deal based on input from several advisors with opposing positions. Also confirming the deal is currently under review. Brian Fung is tracking all of those developments. And quickly and lastly, sticking with tech, Apple holding its second virtual event of the year. There's not going to be any iPhone announcement, but widely expected there will be hardware upgrades to the Apple Watch or perhaps a new lineup of iPads. Analysts saying that Apple really expecting to pivot the Apple Watch to an essential health item, especially in the post-COVID world. Tim Cook kicks off that event at 1 o'clock at CNN Business. We'll be tracking that event from all aspects and angles, and that is where it begins.
Okay.
Jeff, it's Ben. If I could just jump in for 1 second there. We'll be watching the Apple event as well. I just wanted to note that Sanjay and I did a pretty extensive piece with Apple on the Apple Watch a while back. When they come out and they do these events, they really make some bold claims that sort of go beyond the hype that we should be reporting. So if anyone has any questions about that before you put anything out, please feel free to check in with us to make sure that the Watch and Apple are really doing what they say they can do.
Washington.
Okay, so just a couple things on this event today. Alex Marquardt just reports that this whole issue of who's wearing, how this is being seated and masks and everything is still yet to be resolved, and it's 9:30, so we'll see how that all plays out. And then just to add to your list of questions, it also seems like the other big one is how the Palestinians, how they'll get the Palestinians to the table, and that there seem to have been no answers on that topic as of yet. I just also want to point out, Kylie has new reporting on Politico originally broke this IG into these Pompeo's wife's emails, and she now has new emails showing that the secretary's wife used these emails for personal matters, something they've long denied. These emails are in the hands of the IG. We'll see him at 9:15 this morning, so just on that story. And then just a story that Pete Montine broke last night that's doing really well on digital is a mother says Southwest Airlines removed her and her 2-year-old son, who had his mask off, to eat gummy bears from an airplane. And the problem with all of this is that the airline's policy says under 2, and he was 2, but the larger issue here is, yet again, there is no standard for, masks and what people do on airlines, and so it leads to massive confusion. And that's what I got.
Okay, and what about this ruling from the judge in Maryland that Chad Wolf is likely, his leading of the Department of Homeland Security is likely unlawful? I think that's another thing we should be following up on.
Got it.
All right, before we move to politics, anybody have anything they want to bring up?
Hey, Jeff, I just want to emphasize one thing. Virginia was talking about the setup for noon, and obviously we're heavily focused on that, largely because of what Netanyahu might do with his mask, et cetera. But I just wanted to follow up on something that Rick pointed out yesterday about the president's interview, where when he was asked about his concerns about the crowd, and he said, no, I was fine. I was very far away from everyone.
And the same was true, we talked about this on the air, but the same was true at the Latino event he did in Arizona, where he was sitting separated from the crowd on the dais, which was all packed in together. And then, of course, all the people in the seats in the room were packed together. And they just sent out the note saying that there's 1,000 chairs on the White House lawn, all tightly packed together. So this idea that the president says, no, I was fine, I was far away from everyone, again, only concerned about himself, not concerned about the people in the crowd or other members of his team, et cetera. I just think that that's something to also discuss as we look at what's going on the White House lawn at noon, not just about Netanyahu and whether or not he's wearing a mask and what that might mean for him, but also, whether or not Trump can convince him not to, I guess, is the question there. But also just about the rest of the people that are there and whether or not the president has one iota of concern for them or only about himself.
Okay, anyone else? Politics.
Good morning, Jeff. I'm going to start with Joe Biden heading to Florida today for the very first time as the Democratic nominee. Obviously, the mother of all battleground states in many ways. And as we've seen and discussed on this call last week with the polling that was out, he's been underperforming with Latinos, specifically in Florida, but broadly as well, compared to what Hillary Clinton was doing 4 years ago. And while he's overperforming with seniors in Florida from what she did, his underperformance with Latinos is allowing, Donald Trump to be very much tied with him in Florida or keeping the race extraordinarily close, which is why, in addition to the veterans event we will see him do in Tampa today at 6:30 tonight in Kissimmee, Biden's going to host this Hispanic Heritage Month event there and has been launching Spanish language advertisements this week as well, leaning into this and putting an effort in trying to enhance his support there. Randy Kay had a piece up on New Day and is up this morning around that, and Arlette Times traveling with Biden will take over later in the day there in Florida. You mentioned the climate change story on the campaign. Obviously, you have the what Biden is calling Trump the climate arsonist versus Trump's science doesn't know debate between the two of them that was front and center. And I would just note that it's one of the issues. I mean, obviously, these two candidates, there's very little that's similar between them, but this is a huge contrast area between them. I was mentioning yesterday about Joe Biden's huge budget spending proposals. The green economy and dealing with climate change and combating climate change is a huge component of that. It is one of the places where he has really gone a bit more progressive and yes, not the full embrace of the Green New Deal, but certainly unlike healthcare or certain other economic issues where he really carved out and tried to stay a bit more in that more moderate lane. Climate change is one of those areas where he is a huge proposed investment case in versus you've seen the Trump administration sort of rollback after rollback of Obama-era regulations. We'll see, given the news this week, if this will come up tonight in the town hall with the president or in Biden's town hall with us later in the week to see how this continues. I would note that Kamala Harris, who's doing a bit of her day job today, will be in Fresno, California for a briefing on the wildfires, so you might be able to expect some more climate change contrast with Trump there from Harris. Two new Trump ads out this morning, focusing on the economy and with a huge new influx of cash behind them, a $10 million buy. You've seen a lot of the quotes and reporting everywhere about Republicans worried about the disparity of spending on the airwaves between the Biden campaign and the Trump campaign. The Trump campaign often points to the fact that Clinton outspent them in 2016 and he was still able to run, but some Republicans in battleground states still nervous about the disparity they're seeing on their TV screens, and these two ads are part of a big new push and a big new purchase that the Trump campaign made to try and close that. They've taken down their ads in Iowa and Ohio and Nevada, focused more on Arizona, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Florida, North Carolina, Georgia. I would just note these ads are on the economy, they're on China, they're pointing to the president touting his record on what he did for minority and women, for minorities and for women in the economy and jobs arena. It is very much not the main sort of message we hear from Donald Trump himself every day or on his Twitter feed, but it is the one that polls indicate where he actually may have an advantage to press here with Joe Biden. It's interesting to see them go to the economy on this message, and the way that they're doing it with real money behind it is a clear sort of marker that they're trying to put down there. At noon Eastern today, we're going to release two brand new CNN state polls in Wisconsin and North Carolina. In Wisconsin, it'll show Biden with a lead there in that critical Midwestern battleground state, largely fueled by his advantage with women and seniors and independent voters there in the Badger State. In North Carolina, it'll show a margin of error race with no clear leader between the two candidates in the Tar Heel State there. I will note in the Wisconsin poll also that I think it's fascinating is that when asked about do you approve or disapprove the way that Biden or Trump or even the governor, Tony Evers in Wisconsin, responded to the Kenosha protest, Biden scores best of those three politicians on that score. And what is so interesting is when you look at those about how white voters in Wisconsin approved, they split evenly in their approval basically between Trump and Biden on response to the Kenosha protest. But voters of color obviously overwhelmingly approve of the way Joe Biden responded to the protest. But they're splitting the white vote in Wisconsin on that, which I think is interesting and worth noting when those polls roll out at noon this afternoon. And I just want to go back to something Virginia said when she was talking about voting, because I just don't think, I can't stress enough what a significant ruling that Wisconsin court ruling is. That ballots are able to go out and avoid what could have been a very chaotic situation in one of the most critical states in Wisconsin. But B, also for the Biden team, the fact that the Green Party is not on the ballot is hugely significant in a place where we saw third-party effect in 2016 real, and Biden team able to keep the Green Party off the ballot there is significant too. So that's it.
Okay, and I would just add that the President of the United States has just retweeted a post accusing Joe Biden of being a pedophile to his 86 million followers, which is just beyond. Any thoughts on politics?
Hey, Jeff, it's Brandon in Weather and Climate. I think we should push more on what the president said yesterday about it's going to get cooler, talking in California about the fires. Was that just like a flippant comment he made about it's going to get cooler as we get out of summer and head into winter, or is it saying that the climate is going to cool down? Either way, it's a crazy comment that conflates weather and climate that are not the same thing, and there's literally not a scientist in the world who would say that the climate is going to get cooler anytime in our lifetimes.
Completely agree. He completely always confuses climate and weather. Always. Does not understand the difference. I agree with you. Other thoughts?
Hey, Jeff, I do think it's worth a conversation somewhere about what David pointed out as being extremely important, the Wisconsin decision on the Green Party, and having somebody go back and take a look at Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, the vote margins there, how many votes the Green Party got last time in those states, and what a difference it does make whether or not they are on the ballot. You can also go back and look at 2000 and Ralph Nader in the Gore-Bush race and the impact that the Green Party had there. Obviously, the Green Party is on the ballot in many states, but Wisconsin being one of the significant states that Trump won that Biden is trying to flip, these things do make potentially a big difference. And I do think that that's something that we should spend a little time on, or maybe have somebody do a piece where they look at where the Green Party is on the ballot. You know, there's been a lot of talk about Kanye. We had a good piece on Kanye a week or two ago. He's having less significant impact, but the Green Party does make a difference in some states, and I just think it's worth taking a look at.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Hi, Jeff. On the tweet that you mentioned that the president just retweeted, I mean, not only is that unacceptable in all the regular ways that it would be unacceptable, but that's also the QAnon obsession that Democrats and Biden are pedophiles. And I don't know, excuse me, I don't know exactly the best way to get at that without amplifying it further, but it's a direct nod to them as well.
I totally agree. And this is the challenge, right? Not to amplify and give it oxygen, but, you know, it also is just unacceptable that the President of the United States is trafficking in this and doing it. It's a hard line to figure out how to straddle here, but it's just not something that should get a pass either.
Jeff, the other thing related to that, well, I don't know if we want to go there, but, you know, Michael Cohen talking about Trump's comments about his daughter just within a day or two, you know, in his book, Trump's comments about his 15-year-old daughter in the context of that are also, you know, I mean, the president, well, he wasn't president then, but the president's comments about a 15-year-old girl.
Yep. So Washington TV and digital White House, we need to figure out how to handle this.
Okay.
But I don't want to just ignore it. And John Antonio, if you can work with them up.
We'll figure that out.
What else? Okay, digital.
Okay, we've got a conversation going on that tweet right now. We had 31 million yesterday. The big number one was some final call to Bob Woodward. That was the big number one on Apple News too. So thank you, Jamie, always. This morning, the top story is the breaking news with Louisville settling Breonna Taylor's wrongful death lawsuit. That is 11,000 concurrent and rising. Then it's Brownstein's analysis on the paradox of Trump's remarkable stable support over time. The headline is Why the Stability of the Race Promises More Volatility Ahead. Before the Breonna Taylor ruling, that was, the settlement, that was the number one story. Then it's Chad Wolf. We have it, Jeff. Judge rules Chad Wolf likely unlawfully serving as Homeland Secretary from Laura Lai and Paula Blanc. Airbus is looking at flying in formation. That's a counter-programming story that's in the top five. Similarly, a travel/history story on the Holy Grail and the Knights Templar is in the top five. And then Antarctic glaciers, two big ones, are breaking up, and it could have major consequences for sea level rise. So another big climate story rounds out the top stories this morning. Top for engagement is our coronavirus Q&A with 2.5 minutes. Just all the hundreds of thousands of questions that people have asked, and we are answering and continue to push that out. And our top video is Trump supporters explaining why they won't wear masks. On the fires, we're up with the latest, and, you know, some standalone nuggets like smoke has blown all the way to New York. The 22-year-old Oakland A's player saying, I shouldn't be gasping for air after playing yesterday. On Sally, we've got the tracker and the DLE up. A lot of the superlatives that Dave mentioned, like the storm is moving more slowly than most people walk. 90% of tropical weather events are water-related, and Sally's two biggest threats are inland flooding and storm surge. There are 5 tropical storms in the Atlantic for the first time ever, and there's only one hurricane name left in the list for 2020, so after that, probably later this week, it will switch to the Greek alphabet. And the last time that happened was 2005. There are also some incredible satellite and radar images that show both the smoke from the fires sweeping across the country and then I think 2 storms/hurricanes. and maybe a third for me. These are incredible images, so we're looking to do a lot with them on our homepages, but everyone should just check them out. Over on voting, in addition to the news stories we've talked about today, we have a call out to audiences. It's cnn.com/voting issues, just a simple call out where we are getting hundreds of questions so far. It's going to continue to grow, and people sharing their experiences and their thoughts and, again, their questions, and we're just going to answer them and be there to serve as a clarifying voice where we can. On the Apple event, we have a DLE going up for that soon. Like Richard said, no new phone, but new iPads and Apple Watches and all of that. So we will be across that in business. I want to shout out some other strong, buzzy headlines in business that will do well. The best stock in the S&P 500 is 105 years old. It's Carrier. It's the air conditioning company with a skyrocketing share price that beats the gains from Apple and Amazon and all the other tech giants. And it's because of the rush to upgrade air filtration systems everywhere, homes, schools, businesses. Facebook just bought the unused headquarters of REI, so we're digging into that. And then looking ahead to the holidays, the big mall owner, Simon Property Group, says all of their malls will stay closed on Thanksgiving. FedEx is hiring another 70,000 workers for the holiday season, and holiday sales have been projected to be very muted this year. So good package of stories there looking ahead. And then lastly, we talked about it yesterday, but overnight we launched that big interactive on NEMA's piece on the deep and deadly funding cuts in Yemen. It's a rich presentation with graphics and maps and powerful images and loops. And, of course, NEMA's 6+ minute extravaganza. The headline is the hardest part is when we lose a child. And that, of course, has a very strong engagement time, and we'll be getting a lot of play all day today. That's it.
Great. Thank you. John?
Good morning, Jeff. So we are leading the shows right now with Hurricane Sally as it slowly makes its way toward the Gulf Coast. We'll watch the conditions deteriorate throughout the day at Levandera and Gulfport, Gary Tuckman and Biloxi. We're already beginning to see effects of the storm surge. We'll stay close to the Weather Center. We do have the Biloxi mayor next hour, and John King does have the governor of Mississippi about what the state's going to endure. We'll also stay close to the natural disaster on the other coast, Stephanie Elam in California and Martin Savage in Oregon on the western wildfires. John Harwood starts us off at the White House this morning, the new audio tape with Woodward, calling it the plague. The only person to socially distance at the Latino event last night was Trump himself. We'll have a bunch of bilats as the different Mideast leaders get to the White House starting late morning. We'll see if they open any of those up. And then the big South Lawn signing ceremony, we will take that in full. Caitlin Collins is there, Dana Bash, Vivian Salama on the significance of the deal, Warren Lieberman from Israel on the Netanyahu angles, and we'll see whether he's wearing a mask or not and how many in the crowd are actually wearing masks. Sarah Murray's going to stay on the Michael Caputo story for us. We'll keep that in the mix. On coronavirus, Elizabeth Cohen will sweep up all the vaccine news. There's a lot of it, so we're going to bundle it all together with her. Rosa Flores' piece on Florida schools airs next hour. We have Dr. Seema Yasmin and William Hazeltine in the mix. We have a George Washington University vaccine trial participant, and Brianna has the mother of a teenager, a football player. He will also be joining us, who had a very serious bout of coronavirus, only 14 years old, and now suffers from myocarditis. On the 2020 race is Arlette Saenz in Central Florida. Biden meets the veterans at 1 p.m. The Randy K. piece on Biden and the Latino vote, that's going to air in the 10 a.m. hour. During the midday hours, David Challian just mentioned that new CNN polling from the battleground states, North Carolina and Wisconsin, dropped. We have pollsters, GOP and Democratic, to break down those numbers. Josh Campbell is just up, and we'll continue to hit him on that remarkable video showing that rookie deputy helping the other one, her incredible heroism on display. At 1 o'clock, we have Rob Harris, who represents LA Police, to discuss more with him. The Pompeo reporting from Kylie Atwood is going to be in the mix. Brianna's show is going to book on the South Dakota Attorney General story. And finally, Champions for Change. Piece is about to air on the 9 a.m. and then another piece at 2 o'clock.
Thank you very much. Washington.
Morning. We've got Caitlin Collins from the White House Today ceremony and the continued overshadowing by COVID, last night's rallies, masks, all of it. With Biden, we'll have political analysis, and including the president's kind of insane retweet, and so much more. Alex Marquardt is going to package a deeper dive on Mideast deals, what was promised, the regional impacts, and we've got Oren as well. We'll get to Netanyahu today. We'll stay on fires and the hurricane. Nick Watt has our COVID wrap. Sanjay as well, all the vaccine timeline and safety concerns. And Karen Bass joins as well. We'll ask her about the deputy shooting, COVID response, Mideast peace, and more.
And in the Situation Room, we'll keep our focus on all the latest COVID threads, the fact that the spread hasn't slowed down in any real kind of a way, vaccine development and disbursement, the dilemma schools are facing. We do have Bill de Blasio booked, so we'll dig into all of that with him, as well as our medical voices and our rap pieces. The event at the White House today will obviously feature prominently for us both the substance of the deal and the event itself, what it looks like in terms of any social distancing. Jeff, as you mentioned earlier, we do have Jared Kushner booked. We'll push him on all of that, including what the U.S. gave in exchange for these deals, and if Saudi Arabia will be next. We also have Jeffrey Goldberg booked. We'll get his perspective on all of this, including the president's comments this morning about Mattis. And the fires in Hurricane Sally, we'll have reporters across all of that, and we will continue to cover the sheriff's deputies in L.A. As that story continues to unfold. And that's where we start.
Good, thanks, Kurt. Does anybody else have any further thoughts?
Yeah, I have a couple. Number one is, have the two indoor rallies by Trump been only events anywhere in America where there has been a mass gathering indoors in the last 6 months? And if so, I think it's worthy to point that out. In other words, only the President of the United States has approved of an indoor rally with hundreds of people anywhere. None of us can go to a concert. None of us can go to a basketball game. None of us can go to anything except the President of the United States political rally. And I don't think
there have been football games with more people.
Those are outside, though, Jeff.
Oh, yeah.
I'm talking about indoor.
So Rick, there have been, remember the RNC in Charlotte was an indoor event, which we broadcast, and you saw hundreds of people inside the convention center. And there have been some church events, whether they violated their own state rules or not, that we've covered, because we looked this up during the time of the RNC. So there have been some churches that have held large churches with indoor services, perhaps in violation of the rules, but there have been those gatherings, and those are the only ones that at least we came up with when we looked this up. I don't know if Ben or if someone from Health has checked others. But yes, you're right. So between the RNC and these two events, you are correct.
I think that's something, and that's by the leader of the country who's supposed to. I mean, he could have stopped the RNC event, so basically it was done with his approval. But none of us can go the same, but he can approve it, and he's supposed to be the role model of the person. So anyway, that's my point. I think there might be something, some show.
Hey, David, just to add to Rick's point, I think that the real distinguishing factor is the number of people per square foot at these rallies. It's far different than an NFL game or some of these more distance events.
Right. Well, once again, those are all outside, and there's only been a couple of those. The second one is just a question for David. As we're rolling out these individual state polls, we have other state polls from North Carolina and Wisconsin that may that we have approved because Ken's put them out. When do you think it's best to also include polls for those, since we all know that that's sometimes the best indicator for our audience?
Yeah, I don't know that we have enough yet of approved polls, but when we get 4 or 5 of them, I think we have enough to average together. I don't think we're quite there, but they got to be sort of also within the same time frame.
And just my final one is just an awareness alert. How the Washington Post got scammed by those folks who are, crowd scammers. And just a reminder to everybody, because everybody's been doing so great on viral videos and people trying to scam us. Read up on that if you haven't, and make sure that everybody on your team does, because there are people who are out there just trying to scam us every day. And they got the Washington Post, and it happened in Washington, and they let their guard down. It was very embarrassing for the Post. We didn't bite, and good for Washington that we didn't, but it's just a good reminder to keep an eye out for that.
Totally agree. Thank you for that. Thank you for that note. Anyone else?
Hey, Jeff, I just want to bring up one thing that we've addressed somewhat, but I just think we should make sure that to try to take it to its fullest extent, bigger picture. We've talked in the last couple of days about the war on science by Trump and by his administration in terms of some of these things. But the bigger picture, even beyond that, that's a pretty big picture, is suppression of information, which is so important and vital to a democracy. If somebody wanted to really spend some time and put this all together, going all the way back to the Mueller investigation and the Mueller report, the House impeachment hearings where they refused to turn over documents and they refused to allow witnesses to testify, Trump on coronavirus, obviously knowing how deadly the virus was, telling Woodward, but not telling the country, the CDC documents being changed, DHS on Russia interference in the elections and hiding that information and changing it, these Inspector General's reports, which have gotten obstacles and or been suppressed in many ways and not followed up on, and on and on and on. The suppression and withholding of information to protect what in most cases is either wrongdoing or the ability to investigate potential wrongdoing and or to protect the American people. I think that larger conversation is a really important one for us to continue to have, and it goes at the foundations of what the country was built on, and suppression of the press and access, et cetera. All of those things fit in with this.
Sure.
Hey, Jeff, Cynthia, I just want to...
Go ahead, Cynthia.
Sorry. I just wanted to remind everyone when they're doing the Florida Biden coverage that when we talk about the Hispanics in Florida, we really need to be careful to distinguish between the Miami, believing in communism and socialism, and that's their fear against Biden, versus the middle of the state, Central Florida, largely Puerto Rican and other Hispanics. And I just think we say that Hispanics in Florida, we need to be a little bit more specific about that, because there's two different issues, and I think that he's soft on both and he needs to work on both of those. But I just want to make sure we're clear about that.
Yeah, I don't know if you had a chance to see Randy's piece this morning, but I think she covered that pretty well. I think it's a really important point.
Yep, very important point. Okay, everybody, a lot going on. Have a great day. We'll talk to you later.